So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the Social Housing Roundtable again. Nice to see some people in the room and a couple of new faces, which is lovely. My name's Matthew Baird. I've been running these now for 2.5 years or so. The pandemic brought them about, and I'm so glad we can keep running them. This whole thing is backed up by my recruitment business. So for anybody who is watching or who's here now or who's watching back, I've been doing social housing recruitment for 11 years. More recently, a lot more kind of executive recruitment. So if anyone is looking for support in that field, by working with me, we keep these free for everybody. So it's great to be involved, and I'll make sure the links to sign up to the mailing list and stuff are all put in the chat. From there, I wanted to kind of move on to introducing Natalie. So Natalie and I, probably via LinkedIn, a year and a bit ago, got introduced. And I just remember you coming to me with this huge amount of energy and kind of going, here's EDI, here's everything, where do we start? And we talked about supporting carers in the workplace almost exactly a year ago. And from there, and I'll let you kind of pass on to yourself in a moment, but it's been a brilliant journey of where things have kind of evolved and gone to since. And it's a real success story of the roundtable and everything that's gone with it. So thank you so much for coming back. Thank you for joining us again this year for a bit of an update, but also just to really highlight this huge network of people that aren't tapped into, that aren't talked about, and often are quite ostracized and not given the platform. So thank you for coming back. I'll pass over to yourself to do kind of your introductions and I guess a bit about the conversation and where it's going to lead today.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Matt. Hi, everyone. So my name is Natalie Quilter. I'm the Diversity, Inclusion and Wellbeing Lead at Notting Hill Genesis. Like Matt said, it was almost a year ago since I delivered a very similar talk on this topic. And through today's conversation, I'll be talking a little bit more about me, my life as a carer, how your background can influence you into thinking you're not a carer. Our carers network at Notting Hill Genesis, the impact we've had in and out, the Equality Act 2010, and why caring could become the 10th protected characteristic. And then I'll round it off with a few things that you can do within your organisation. So to kick things off, I wanted to just provide a bit of a bigger picture and context on caring in the UK. So you can see on the screen that there's various facts and figures, and within our lifetime there will be 9 million carers. Interestingly, the total number of unpaid carers actually fell by 600,000 from the last census in 2011. And the Carers UK actually did have a bit of a dispute around this, and the ONS said that they actually framed the question differently. And because it was asked during the pandemic, when COVID restrictions were reduced and there was very limited travel and visits to other households, this may have had quite a big impact on that at the moment. But despite that, it doesn't take away that there are even more people spending more time on caring than ever before. So rising to 1.5 million people in England and Wales, providing more than 50 hours a week of unpaid care. And in terms of that sort of monetary amount, this group of people are vital to our economy. So the value of unpaid care was estimated at £530 million per day, £193 billion per year during the pandemic. So not only is it morally right, obviously, to support this group of staff, but there is a huge economic benefit as well, ensuring that these group of people are looked after and supported. And you can see here as well, I know a study which was done by Business in the Community and IPOS about how many people are actually combining paid work with care and caring for an adult too. So a little bit about me. This is a picture of my lovely family. And as you may see, my mum is wheelchair bound. So she has a condition which is multiple sclerosis, which affects the nervous system. She also has a number of mental health conditions, along with bipolar and schizophrenia, to name a few. In terms of my caring career. It started probably when I was about 9 or 10 years old. I can remember, and Ever since then, it's included washing, changing my mum, assisting her to the toilet, making meals, but also raising my little brother as well. So sort of shielding him from many of the different aspects as well. This is something that I found really hard to talk about with other people, just because in terms of whether they would understand or not. And for me personally, it was something that I would never discuss in the workplace. Number of different reasons, but fear of judgment, potentially affecting career progression within a company. And when I joined Notting Hill Genesis, I didn't say anything, but that all changed when my mum suffered a stroke, and my care responsibilities increased even further. Now, luckily, I had a really supportive manager who was able to help me, but it did show to me that there aren't any policies in place to support carers, and there wasn't a network in place to support this group of people. So there was a real gap within our company, and it's within the social housing sector more widely. So some of you may have got involved last year in the National Housing Federation ED&I tool. And they found that there was only 1% and 4% of workforce data available in the sector for caring responsibilities, which was the largest gap identified in a report alongside socioeconomic status. So within our sector, within social housing, this is an area that we just really don't know about. We don't seem to be collecting the data. But I think that's through no fault of our own. But I think it's because it's a group of people that haven't been spoken about or thought of until the pandemic hit, really, after that. What I did next was our Beehive, our women's network, actually reached out and said, are there any carers in the business that would like to share their story to support the Carers Week campaign? I decided to share my story after everything that happened, and from there is where all of this created. So me sharing my story here, creating our carers network internally as well, being inundated with other carers in the business saying that I'm going through the same thing, and knowing you're not alone really does make a difference. But before I go on to that, I do want to touch on the point around, am I a carer? So I popped on the NHS definition of what it means to be a carer. But interestingly, the NHS have also noted that many carers don't see themselves as carers, and it takes an average of 2 years to acknowledge their role as a carer as well. There was a really interesting study that was done back in 2014 by Jennifer Parr. So it's called Culture, Caregiving and Health. And it basically looked into a group of caregivers and put them into 4 groups: African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, and European Americans. And whilst caregiving was seen as right and correct by all, the outcome found that people from an ethnically diverse background were less likely to class themselves as a carer, when to society they should formally be classed in that way. And the main theme around that was caregiving being culturally embedded within oneself. So I took this study and I ran it within the organisation, sort of exploring it in a little bit more detail, what the outcomes were, and really trying to show people that even though you've seen it from generation to generation, even though it's embedded in your culture that you have to look after your elderly parents, you know, it would be frowned upon if you didn't, that you should still be getting support services that you need. And interestingly, after running that session internally, we saw the largest daily increase in our carers network, and they were all from an ethnically diverse background. So it was really powerful to me to show to people that they can get the support, and they should be getting the support as well. And I'm happy to share that story, the study as well, after in the session as well. Also, there's been studies that those particularly from a South Asian and African backgrounds have been found to have a higher likelihood of sandwich caregiving in the UK. And that's basically where an individual is responsible caring for both their aging parents and own children at the same time as well. So going on to the Carers Network. So here are some lovely photos of some of our members and some of the different sessions that they run. And what I'm most happy about here is that people are happy to share their face and put their face to the story as well. And staff networks generally, you know, they provide a fantastic opportunity to continue to tune in to what matters to employees. You know, the networks are a source of building a community and strategic partner in the organisation. A key thing that we've done is intersectionality is really key for us, working with other staff networks that are already established, and it also helps give that platform to the Carers Network as well. So we're running at the moment something with Parallel, which is our health and disability network. You can see we did a lunch and learn on raising an autistic child, the ups and downs with Kisa and Michelle. And then the following week, a member from Parallel who has autism shared her lived experience on that. I did a session on caring for someone with multiple sclerosis, and then someone in the organisation who has multiple sclerosis shared their story. And it's a really interesting way to educate the business, looking at both sides as well. And we're also intersectionality. So one of our fabulous members, Pamela, she shared her story as a gay parent and the struggles that she's had as well within the sort of caring realm too. Something that's in the top left-hand corner, this was a session that we ran by someone called AKA Life Coaching, because what we found was that whilst it was great creating a safe space for carers to talk, a lot of people don't, especially becoming carers for the first time, don't know where to start in terms of filling out a carer's assessment, where to go, how to complain, how to get through to anyone. So we had a professional come in to talk through all of this and debunk any myths and what sort of keywords you should be using as well to get your case forward. In terms of the impact that we've had in and out, so it was Matt really that's kicked off all of the work that we've had externally. Something that I'm really proud of is that Notting Hill Genesis signed up to Harry's Pledge. This was back in sort of 2020, 2021. Harry's Pledge is specifically for the social housing sector, so please do take a look. And it's about supporting carers not only within your workplace, but looking at the houses that we build as well, making sure that they're adaptable too. But following on from that last social housing roundtable, there were about 4 housing associations that subsequently signed up to Harry's Pledge. And I've been working with a few smaller housing associations on how they can set up a carers network internally, which is fantastic. I then did a case study with the National Housing Federation as well on creating a carers network, so giving that blueprint out to other organisations. And I spoke recently at London Build in Olympia, so with the likes of Amazon and Kia, all these big organisations, and I was making sure that no matter what industry you're in, you know, we're supporting carers there.
Quick question in the chat, Natalie, because someone had mentioned that there needs to be a person in the workplace for carers to talk to, and I want to come back to that in a moment. But Carolyn has just raised the question: through the work you've done, is it predominantly women who are the caregivers, or has it been quite a broad spectrum? Yeah, so in our organisation, we have more women generally. So we've got about 65% female workforce. And within our carers network, it's about, I would say about 80% women. So it is predominantly women, but it's harder because obviously we've got a larger female group. But what we have been doing internally, and this is sort of twofold, is to try and encourage more male carers to join. We've been sharing, the members that we do have, they've been sharing their stories on their caring responsibilities to try and encourage others. But something else we're working on is sharing caring responsibilities for those that are at senior level, so head of, directors, and so on. Because a key thing for us is that just because you're a carer, it shouldn't impact your career, and you should still be able to progress and move up in the organisation. And Robert East, who's our one of our directors, when he shared his story, that saw a huge increase both from a male perspective, but also other people realising that it's okay
to say that I'm a carer and get the help, but also still progress in the organisation. And what I say is that carers, they are so strong, resilient. There are so many qualities, you know, I won't swear because it's been recorded, but the SHIT that they have to go through dealing with the care commission, or, you know, the stuff they're going on at home. A lot of this work stuff, you know, it's easy. This is the easy part of the daily life. You know, it's when we sort of go home, that's when the work really does kick in. So I would definitely say that.
Amazing. And I think I was going to say, and I'm really glad that you raised that, because I imagine that whilst you might get more female carers and things on those lines, there's going to be a stigma attached, and I think more so almost in the male community as well. So it's brilliant that you hear that. And actually, you know, someone said there, Val has put being a carer, there needs to be flexibility in the contract without the threat of losing their job. And I know that's part of the Harry's Pledge, and some of the things we'll come on to shortly. And brought up by Carolyn, when Notting Hill Genesis to Natalie confirm if when Notting Hill Genesis to a quality impact assessment, this particular characteristic is considered.
Yes, it is. So this is, see, Karen, you're jumping ahead. This is part of the impact we've had internally as well. So we're on the same wavelength. I love it. But yeah, following on from that, in terms of what we've done internally, the impact that we've had, we've added carers to our diversity inclusion impact assessments, which, you know, many of you may also call equality impact assessments. And the DIIAs have also been added to the project management methodology as well. So ensuring carers are considered on new projects being rolled out, along with already being a key part when reviewing different HR policies too. And that is such an easy and simple thing that everyone can do, just adding carers to make sure that they're considered. We also updated our flexible working policy to ensure it's inclusive of carers, because interestingly, we had I had the Carers Network review our flexible working policy, and they found the language, whilst unintentionally, they found the language quite negative, and it almost seemed sort of trying to put it off slightly. So we actually updated it to show that it was inclusive of carers as well. But something that we're rolling out in about a week is carers passports as well, if you haven't already heard of them. Again, you can find loads of information online, but this is basically a tool to help carers have a conversation with their manager, and in terms of what flexibility they may need. And what I'm just going to say here is that a lot of organisations, you know, we're all different, but a lot do have parent and carers networks combined. And the only thing I would say to that, because for me personally, I think it's better if they are separate. And the reason being is it's hard to get that distinction sometimes between when you're a parent and when you're a carer. The needs are very different. And whilst a flexible working policy might be useful for a parent, you know, they need every Friday off because they're not at school. For a carer, it's not as straightforward as that. If they have a child with, for instance, with learning disabilities, they can't just find a nanny to look after them. They need to find someone very specialist, which is very, very difficult in that sense. So this carer's passport is going to be this new avenue to discuss other flexible working arrangements as well. And that report that I discussed earlier from Business in the Community, it found that those with caring responsibilities, 44% said this would help with childcare, and 54% said this would help caring for adults as well. So it's a really looking at your policies, making sure it's inclusive, making sure you're as flexible as possible, really does help and support that. And a key thing I mentioned earlier about the National Housing Federation and the lack of data, we've made sure that we've started to collect data within the organisation. So when we're doing our staff satisfaction surveys and generally our diversity collection, and we found that 19% of the organisation have caring responsibilities, which is huge. And that was, yeah, we never even thought anything like that. When I first started the Carers Network, we had about 5 people join, and now we're about just over 100, but we've still got a long way to go. So even if you're starting off small, you're making a difference, is what I always say. So keep at it in that sense. But I touched on it earlier about that progression for carers and why it's really important to share that. And this alludes back to the report again done by Business in the Community, where they found that they felt that 4 out of 10 carers actually stopped applying for a job or promotion because they thought they wouldn't get it due to their caring responsibilities. And that's most common with women at 58%, and ethnically diverse carers, which was at 50% compared to white carers at 39%. So it's a really important area and goes back to that diversity piece of, am I a carer? And if you have established it, you then get worried about that progression piece. So trying to hit all of these elements and support where we can. And something that we made sure externally is on our external website, showing that we're carer friendly as well, which is very important too. So I wanted to put this in here as well. So all of you will know about the Equality Act 2010. There's 9 protected characteristics, and something that Carers UK are advocating for at the moment is for caring responsibilities to become the 10th protected characteristic. Now, some people say there aren't there already rights for carers, and yes, technically, that's under section 13, which covers discrimination by association. And this provision is important, but Carers UK say that the law is not clearly written and understandable, and is obviously not as direct as the other 9 protected characteristics are. So they've gathered a lot of evidence, and they're putting it forward, especially after the pandemic, and they're running a number of different campaigns at the moment. I'm not sure whether it will be added. I know that recently it was rejected by the government for menopause to be within the Equality Act, and that was rejected. But I think it's at least making people have the conversation around caring responsibilities and, you know, the support that we need to give to these people. I mean, for me, something in the reports and studies that I've discussed earlier, it also focuses around mental health. So myself, it was back in 2014, I went to a very dark place. I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. Everything got a bit too much, as it were, but I've since had the support. I've gone through cognitive behavioural therapy, which I always try and advocate and say that never feel afraid to talk about counselling or going through therapy, because it really does make a difference. But there's this group of staff that have to take on a lot emotionally. There's a lot of different things to juggle in that sense. So making sure you're supporting staff from that mental health side, whether it be through an employee assistance program, mental health first aiders, whatever it may be, making sure that there is that provision in place. And that was one of the key reasons I set up the Carers Network, is that every Wednesday, 2 till 3 p.m, we have a safe space where carers can just come together and just release, just have a chat, talk about, you know, what's going on. And sometimes it can, you know, things can be challenging. Everyone says caring is very rewarding, and whilst it is, it can be very frustrating and hard at sometimes, and you need to just let it out with some people that understand. So that has been absolutely fantastic, and not one of our, since we've introduced that, not one of our members have taken any long-term sick or anything, which is great. And it shows that impact just talking can really have on a group of people as well. So before we get into the Q&A, I wanted to do a bit of a roundup on what you can all do in your positions within your organisation. So I know that we'll all be at different stages. I mentioned about the diversity, inclusion, impact assessment, so adding carers onto there, creating a carers network. Always happy to chat outside of the room as well if you want to know a little bit more about that. Educating your business on what it means to be a carer through workshops and webinars. This is something that I found really key, because when you don't have caring responsibilities, it's very hard to understand the actual toll that it takes. So we've started to run a number of workshops educating on what it means to be a carer, and something that I've created recently is a self-education resource page on our intranet, and it's basically got a list of books, films, podcasts and websites that people without caring responsibilities can access to try and learn a little bit more and understand what it means to be a carer as well. I mentioned Harry's Pledge earlier. That's a great thing for organisations to set up to, and celebrating achievements of carers in your business, you know, highlighting them, showing the strength. We do a series called My Life as a Carer as well. So each month we highlight a different carer within our organisation, talking about their caring responsibilities and what they've achieved most recently as well. And that's a great way to interact with all of the business, but also showcase the fabulous carers too. And finally, I've just done a page on some further information where you can find a little bit more information on some of the topics that I've discussed, but also a little bit more around staff networks if you haven't got any in place at the moment. So I'm sure that Matt or I can send around the further information as well if people want to follow up. And with that, thank you very much for listening, and I'll stop sharing. We can have a chat.
Sounds good. Firstly, thank you for so much openness there, because I mean, A, amazing, but B, obviously it's difficult to be vulnerable like that, and so massive thank you to you. I think it's a huge testament to kind of the journey and everything that's been going on over the last year, that A, you feel you can, but B, of how important kind of that lived experience has really been in shaping the decisions made, and obviously how far you've been able to kind of take things for the network and for that carers network that's been put in place. As Val has mentioned in the chat, there's so much stigma still in the workplace regarding carers, and certainly I think there is in wider society too. I think people kind of just assume it's as you say, in some cultures just an expectation that you take that on as well, not really envisaging how exhausting it is. And Alison has mentioned, I work in governance. Are there any examples of these networks being extended to board members? Is that something that's going on in Notting Hill Genesis at the moment?
So interestingly, they haven't been extended to board members, but what we have done, we had this fabulous speaker come in called Sharon, and we actually did a session with our staff network chairs and all of our board members and executive board to learn more about the impact of staff networks, the influence that we can have on the organisation and why it should be supported. So, but that's an interesting point to make in terms of making sure that these networks are available to board members, because that's something that I hadn't even thought about extending it out to. I've gone from the other angle of educating them on the staff networks rather than actually saying that if they want to join, they're more than welcome. So I'm writing that down as a takeaway for myself. So thank you.
I mean, I was thinking in particular about, you know, when you're trying to widen all this, there's a lot of discussion at the moment about diversity in boards, and some of the things partly existing board members, giving them access, but more in terms of how we might support people who are in caring situations who wanted to get onto a board. That would be sort of your equality impact assessment. But I think it crops up a lot when we have, you know, tenant and resident members, but I think it needs thinking about in a wider.
No, definitely. I mean, we have we're lucky in the sense that we've got a diversity champion on our board, and we also have our chair doing the NHF, you know, diversity challenge as well. So it's a topic that's, you know, very important and well discussed. But I think around the piece of supporting someone that is a carer to get onto a board and how they can access, we did a lot of work with them on more so focusing on race. But I think this is definitely an area that the next area that they can look into, get involved in. So thank you for that.
It is mad, isn't it, when we talk about EDI and we talk about diversity, so often either race and gender are the top two, and yet, as you mentioned, even without carers, there's 7 other protected characteristics. And so it is interesting when we go through a lot of talks regarding EDI, they're always the two that tend to come to the forefront first, which is why conversations like this are so important. Val, it's great to have you with us. Do come in.
Yeah, I'm not going to swear, but I went to a wellbeing group in my landlord's, and the person that was holding it swore and then said disabilities. He turned and said that that's not what he's at this wellbeing group, and I said, well, it is, because disability affects every culture going. So that needs to be talked about, and he swore again and said disabilities. So if that's coming from a level of staff, it's a challenge, because I've been fighting, like I said, 12 years to get carers' disabilities taken notice of, and it's just I'm banging my head against a brick wall.
I mean, that's shocking that someone in the organisation would say that, and part of me thinks that I hope someone has put in something against him, because that's not right in any sense.
I put a complaint in saying that is absolutely shocking, that his empathy and everything else is wrong for that sort of role, but he's still in the role. So
and what I'd say is that I think, you know, touching on the education piece earlier is why it's so important, because, you know, sadly there are still a lot of people that don't get it, don't understand for one reason or another, and educating the business, whether it be through a professional workshop or body, or what I mentioned earlier about the Carers Network and Disability Network teaming up and giving both sides of the story, educating through personal stories as well. There will be a way to be able to connect with that person, but I think for the organisation, they need to work out whether it's best to go down the educational route more professionally, or down that sort of sharing the personal stories. But I do hope something does happen and you get the support that you need as well, Val. There are some great memberships and organisations supporting carers and disabled and long-term health conditions in the workplace. So I'm happy to share those afterwards as well.
I've got a meeting with the actual CEO next week, 1-to-1. So I'm hoping to raise it there as well, about how to move forward.
No, definitely. Good luck with that.
And I'm glad the CEO is there are CEOs, unfortunately, who wouldn't open that door. So I'm glad at least that's going to take place. Carolyn, I can see you come off mute. Do come in.
Yeah, I just think it's such an important element of that housing associations and all organisations should be considering. I've worked in an organisation that supported unpaid carers for a couple of years, and set up peer support groups for unpaid carers in various areas, in dementia, in drug and alcohol support, and in mental health. And that was really useful for those people that were carers to have those specific as well peer support groups. One that was really surprising was the success of the drug and alcohol, because that's something that's you know, really difficult for people to share. And although it is kind of seen as a choice by the person that's using the drug or you know, whatever it is, it's often not. You know, it's a coping factor, and parents and family find that very difficult to talk about, because they kind of, you know, it's a hidden thing. That's really a tricky one. And dementia is really tricky, because friends and family just disappear. You know, they head for the hills, and so that person really becomes isolated. So there's lots of aspects to it that I think really people don't understand. And I think what you're doing, Natalie, is brilliant. And I've kind of been gently influencing at my organisation since I started. You know, and you sometimes feel like you're walking through treacle, but I had a bit of success this morning, you know, around the equality impact assessment, and you know, using that as a way of highlighting carers, and you know, you've got to find your ways in, and there's more than one way to skin a cat. So it's just being a little bit kind of like think outside of the box, really, to raise it within your organisations if you can. So yeah, I'm banging the drum.
That's what I love to.
Here I am, and you know, happy to, you know, I think it's great what you're doing, and I'm hoping that eventually I'll be able to perhaps start a carers network where I am. But you know, it's just slow steps, really. You know, breaking down those barriers and bringing that awareness, you know, to people. No, you know, there's also that kind of like long-term impact on a carer's own health and well-being, and I'm pretty sure I read statistics to say that, you know, being a carer can foreshorten your own, you know, life expectancy, And some of the women that I supported when I was in that world were really, really struggling, you know, and you could tell it was a real drain, give up work to do it, you know, and very lonely life. So I think we need to kind of do all we can to support people while they're carrying on with their work. And they may well extend their work life because of that support that you're giving within, you know, in your organisation. So it's great.
Thank you for that, Carolyn, and fantastic to hear that carers are being added to the equality impact assessment as well. And like you said, you know, you might not be able to all of a sudden introduce a carers network in your organisation, but finding the little things that you potentially can to raise awareness is where you need to start. And it'll be different for everyone on the call here as well. And it was interesting you pointing out, obviously, there's this group of carers, but they look after people with dementia, you know, whatever it may be, myself, multiple sclerosis. Something that we introduced because it's very specific as well. We partnered up with an organisation called AKA Life Coaching, and they're providing one-to-one individualised support. So we bought a bulk of vouchers and handing those out to carers within the network. And this lady's fantastic. We met at an event, so it's always good to network because we would never have crossed paths otherwise. And yeah, she's helping them to write care plans, but also looking on how they can look after themselves as well. So she's sort of like an ex-lawyer, I think, as well. So anyone that's also struggling, trying to bang that drum and nothing's being heard, she's also helping you on that sense too. So that's something that I had realised sort of the back end of last year, that it's great having that group support, but that individualised specific support is also key as well. And this is how we've been able to address that. So it's great you had that at your previous company too.
I mean, the question, I know we discussed it once or twice, but how did you kind of get the ball rolling? I think it's such an important part of this journey and everything else, because you know, sometimes you just go, oh, I just need to start something. I put up some flyers, I sent some emails, some people came together and it just kind of grew, and others get something kind of more coordinated centrally. So how did you get that ball rolling?
Mm-hmm. So I think I'm in a very unique position in the sense that within our organisation, we had 4 very strong staff networks already in place. So it's something that had been adopted by the business. All the networks had an executive board sponsor. And after I shared my story, I received so many emails personally, but also on our intranet. There was lots of messages of support. And I went to our previous ED&I lead and sort of said that, look, there's a massive gap here. There's all of these people that are sharing their stories and there's nothing to help or support them. I think that we should be starting a carers network. So within our organisation, we brought it to something called our inclusion steering group, and I raised it there, sort of provided that evidence, and you know, they said, are you happy to run the network yourself? So I said yes. But one of the key things for me was making sure that we had that senior leader buy-in, so having that conversation with the executive board as well. And we have our now COO Katie Bond as our executive board sponsor, because for me, when anyone does set up a network here, is that you need an advocate at that executive board level to be able to champion your cause, to be able to raise any issues you're experiencing. And yeah, she's one of the reasons we've had a massive impact as well across the organisation. So she has flexible working herself, so sharing that story, saying, hey, you know, apart from CEO, she's right at the top of the organisation, but she works flexibly and it hasn't stopped her. She's got, you know, the 2 kids. She supports her friends who also have caring responsibilities, that it doesn't need to impact that career, and that we're here to help and support any way we can to make sure that you can sort of still progress up through the organisation. So yeah, for me, it's so important having that senior leader buy-in, and I always say that for any sort of staff network that's in place as well.
And that says, I think, a lot of time about culture of the business and things like that as well, which isn't something you can always do. But as Carolyn said, sometimes you just got to keep banging the door. And that's exactly kind of where things have gone. So what's the, I'm just kind of looking, you know, what would you see as being a success then from where you are now to kind of the end of the year? What what's the hope for this year regarding the Carers Network or the other projects you're working on? I appreciate it. We hadn't planned that
Yeah,
question.
look, this is it. Put me on the spot there.
I'm waiting for more questions to come through. So while they are, I'm going to fire something a bit less.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think for me, I know that there are a lot more people within the organisation that have caring responsibilities that are not part of the network. So it will be for me trying to understand and reach out to those people, because, and what I think sometimes that people think, oh gosh, if I'm part of a network, I have to do something, or that takes up time. And it's trying to say that, no, like you can be involved as much as you like or as little as you like. You know, I do my monthly updates to everyone within the network. You can just be on the mailing list. And I think for me, it's about trying to communicate that out, that it's not another thing to be added on to the day job, as it were, that it's literally just more of a resource. And that if you need to speak to someone, I mentioned earlier, we have those weekly safe space catch-up sessions, that if you need to jump on, if one day it does get too much, there is this group of people that will be ready and waiting to hear your story and have that conversation. We had we kicked it off again a few weeks ago, the sort of safe spaces. And for me, what was great to see was that there were so many new faces compared to 2022. So they'd been in the network for quite a while, but for one reason or another, they've started to come to these groups, and I'm just seeing it grow and grow every week, which is fantastic. But at the same time, you know, it also shows what's happening within our care system and how things are also going wrong. You know, I had one story, her mum's got dementia, she was in hospital, they wanted to take her out, but social services were blocking it, even though they were able to look after her. And it just, you know, it still highlights there are so many issues that the government need to address in this aspect. I was talking to Matt earlier. My mum actually went in hospital on Friday, so she's quite ill at the moment, but she's impacted by the doctor strike that's currently happening. So she was meant to have a number of tests. We were meant to meet with the doctor on Monday, go through the tests and results and so on, but that's all been put on hold for 3 days. And whilst I support the strike, it's also hard trying to get that balance, because you also want to see your mum get better as well. So, you know, there's a lot of things that the government does need to address, because when they are not addressing these issues, it's impacting so many people. And you know, it's impacting my mum's health currently, it's impacting me and my dad in terms of what's next. So it's such a big knock-on effect, which I think as well isn't recognised as well.
And I think this is so much thing is it's that blend between the two. And I imagine everything like the cost of living, whilst it's affecting, you know, everybody, I think anybody trying to be a carer and the extra equipment and machinery and sometimes things needed, all these additional costs are getting extreme, I think, would probably be the term. And I've got my partner works in the NHS, and the difference now in terms of some of the cost of medicines and other things and the accessibility to some stuff that's more kind of both from Brexit and unfortunately from the pandemic have been, all of this is becoming more difficult. And so I'm not surprised to hear that, as you've mentioned, there's a lot of stress being held there, but because I think a few people have mentioned the stigma attached to it, sometimes it's incredibly difficult to even talk about that in the first place.
And with the sort of cost of living as well, there's obviously been a lot of cuts as well. So my mum previously used to go to, there was a session near us, there was a multiple sclerosis centre. She'd go every week and they'd like play music, and it was a great space for people to get together. You know, we had Dial-A-Ride pick her up and then it would take her there. Dial-A-Ride got cut, you know, that was stopped, and then the centre closed down because they didn't have any funding. And that was almost like a bit of respite for, you know, myself and my dad. And, you know, I'm not surprised looking at the census data that it has increased up to 4.7% of people actually giving more than 50 hours of care per week, because all of these different things that are being cut, you know, it has that impact on the people that are caring. And it's not like you can get, you know, other carers that can come in or, you know, sort of fill that time as well. So that is definitely another element there. Caroline, I can see you unmuted.
Yeah, I'm just interested to see and to ask you about how having information about carers, has that extended to your residents, your tenant people, you know, your people that you support, and thinking about things like you know, when you do repairs and things like that in properties and stuff, and having that flexibility around when you attend. I mean, we have a kind of like, you know, it's an AM or PM kind of almost sort of like, and for some, you know, and there's no specific time, like no right time. So you'll get people say, well, I have this to do and I have that to do. And there's an expectation that they'll make arrangements, you know, to work around us. Whereas I feel personally that we should be doing a lot better in working around them, you know, and in some cases we do. But I just think it should be a right across the board wherever possible, especially where we've identified that there are, you know, extenuating circumstances where people need that little bit of extra flexibility and a little extra bit of support and understanding around their vulnerabilities. So I wondered what, you know, whether you have got a real plan of action in that regard.
Yeah, so they're aptly named the Carers Network, but they're an external organisation. And they predominantly work within West London, so covering sort of Hammersmith and Fulham and those sort of locations. But that's available on our website as well, and it's actually for them to support residents within those boroughs. So if anyone does have any sort of properties within the sort of West London area, I can give you the contact details of the guy that we work with. But they can access them, and then it will help them advising on what available support was within their local authority, and also helping them write carers plans and assessments as well. And it's completely free as well. So we offer that on our external website. But yeah, if anyone's got any properties in that sort of West London area, I can link you up with that organisation, which is great. And Karen, I think in terms of that flexibility piece, we're doing a lot internally to see how we can better support residents, especially when it comes to repairs and so on. We've got a number of different resident voices groups where, you know, concerns can be raised, but we're going through a bit of a change at the moment within our organisation. So I'm hoping that at the end of the year, we really would have seen that big improvement in terms of supporting residents even better than before.
Thank you.
There is thank you for that point. There's a point that would like to be made anonymously, so I'm just going to pause the recording while someone brings in their point in just a moment.
I'm just going to quickly just respond to a comment just in terms of it's great to have a carers network, because when you have various different care responsibilities, like you mentioned, ADHD or autism, people then link up outside of the network and share resources and talk. And I know that there's a sort of subgroup as well for caring for those with autism, and they've been able to help with schools and everything. So it's a fantastic resource in that sense as well. But sorry, Matt, I'll let you answer.
No, absolutely. I wanted to touch on that, and also just to kind of reinforce what that last minute was, whilst on pause, we talked there about, and it's a big part in the recruitment and retention piece, just assume that flexibility doesn't work for everybody. And it was just to kind of reiterate that point that we made while on pause there, to say that just because you're a carer doesn't mean that's all you are. And actually you need that escape from, escape's maybe the wrong word, but actually I think for some people it is, be able to be you in work and everything else. I know I work full time. I don't care for my partner, but I know if she's home, I'm like, oh, I'll go spend time, whatever else. And she might want a hand with something. It's a distraction, and I'm not even a carer. So to do that as a carer must be incredibly difficult at times. And so I think that stigma attached with, oh, well, if you're a carer, you're at home, all you're doing is this, that there's a balance there to be had, isn't there?
No, definitely. And like we were discussing earlier, it's what we found from our carers network was that being in the workplace is me time. And, you know, it's actually like, I know that you mentioned escape, but it is that sort of different life. And when I was mentioning earlier about not wanting to say I was a carer, is also, you know, I am more than a carer as well. Like, I'm proud to be a carer, but there is so much more to me as well. And it's sort of trying to get that differentiation across as well. But yeah, just to end on, thank you everyone for obviously coming and joining and listening today. I'm sure I'll be back in another year's time with Matt talking about supporting carers, because I think for us, we're at the very start of our journey, that you don't hear about too many carers networks within the social housing world. The NHF ED&I tool, there's only 1% of data available on caring responsibilities, which is shocking. So they're running it again in April. So hopefully we can see a change, but we're at the start of our journey, but everyone here, we can start making that difference today as well.
We absolutely can. And to anybody who's either here today or is watching the recording back, what's the best way to get in touch with you for advice on anything, Natalie?
You can drop me over an email on natalie.quilter@nhg.org.uk, or how me and Matt connected, add me on LinkedIn and drop me a message on LinkedIn. So yeah, connect with me on there is probably the best way as well. And we can have another relationship like this and hopefully start supporting you as well elsewhere.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for being so open, so honest, so vulnerable at times today. It's been a really, really powerful session, and one that I'll make sure the recording goes up very quickly because we need to get this message out there. So thank you everybody. Perfect. And see you all at the next session. Cheers.
See you later.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.